My mother traded me for money. When I was just 9. The envelope felt heavy in my 80-year-old hands. After 7 decades, my mother's final confession had found its way to me. My arthritic fingers trembled as I slid the yellowed paper from inside. Her familiar handwriting swimming before my tear-filled eyes. Dearest Josephine, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. There are things I never told you about that day I left you at Madam Winter's house. Things about the money. About why I really did it. I couldn't breathe. All these years, I'd constructed a life around what I thought was the truth. That my mother had traded me away for drinking money when I was 9 years old. That she'd chosen liquor over her own flesh and blood. But this letter suggested something else. Something that threatened to unravel the very foundation of who I'd become. The nursing home attendant knocked gently on my door. Ms. Josephine? Your granddaughter's here to see you. I quickly folded the letter and tucked it beneath my pillow. Melody couldn't see me like this. Not with my world shattering all over again. I'd built myself into someone strong. Someone who survived. Someone who'd overcome the little girl sold away on a spring afternoon in 1953. Tell her I'll be right out. I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Just need a moment. But as I rose from my bed, my legs buckled beneath me. 7 decades of carefully constructed strength collapsing all at once. The truth was coming for me, ready or not. Before we jump back in, comment where you're tuning in from. And if this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1953. Stand up straight, Josephine. And stop fidgeting with your dress. Mama hissed, pinching my arm as we stood on the porch of the grandest house I'd ever seen. Madam Winter's house shone white like a giant wedding cake against the blue sky. But Mama, I don't want to stay here, I whispered. Please don't leave me. Mama's eyes flashed with something. Annoyance, fear, I couldn't tell which. But she squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. This is a special opportunity for you. Madam Winters runs an academy for gifted girls. I can't provide for you proper, not since your daddy passed. That wasn't true. Daddy had been dead 3 years now, and we'd managed. Sure, sometimes dinner was just cornbread and beans, but we had each other. Lately though, Mama had taken to disappearing at night, coming home smelling like sweet perfume and whiskey. The massive oak door swung open, and there stood Madam Winters, tall and sleek as a stiletto knife. Her silver hair pulled so tight it made her eyes slant upward like a cat's. Ah, Helen, she said, looking at my mother with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. And this must be little Josephine. Her gaze cut through me, measuring, assessing, like I was a piece of fruit she was considering buying. Just as you described. Very promising. She extended one long-fingered hand toward me. Come, child. I clung to Mama's skirt. Please no. Josephine. Mama snapped, peeling my fingers away. Don't embarrass me. This is for your own good. Madam Winters nodded to someone inside, and a man emerged, handing my mother an envelope. She took it quickly, tucking it into her purse. My blood ran cold. Mama, what's that? Nothing for you to worry about, she said, not meeting my eyes. The stipend we discussed, Madam Winters said coolly. For Josephine's education and care. Now shall we conclude our business? What business? Mama. My voice rose as panic set in. You're coming back for me, right? Mama bent down, her face inches from mine. For a moment, I thought I saw tears in her eyes, but then they hardened like glass. Be good, Josephine. Make something of yourself. Before I could say another word, she turned and walked down the path toward the waiting taxi. Mama! I screamed, trying to run after her, but Madam Winter's hand clamped down on my shoulder like an iron claw. Control yourself, Josephine, she said, her voice sharp as she dragged me inside. Your mother has made her choice. She's been quite generously compensated for your placement here. The door closed with a sound like a coffin lid. Through the windows, I watched the taxi pull away, my mother never looking back. That night, locked in a bare attic room with 3 other girls, I curled into myself and tried to understand what had happened. Madam Winters had explained it clearly enough when she'd taken my clothes and given me a plain gray dress. Your mother has sold your indenture to me, she'd said, as if discussing the weather. You'll work in my household until you're 18. In exchange, you'll receive room, board, and training in proper deportment. If you're particularly gifted, you might advance to household manager. If not, well, there are always positions for girls in the service industry. The other girls in the room had looked at me with pity. Later, one of them, Ruby, who'd been there 2 years, whispered the truth as we lay in our narrow beds. "This ain't no academy," she said. "It's just fancy words for domestic service. Your mama took money for you, same as all our folks did." I didn't believe her at first. My mama loved me. There had to be a mistake. But as days stretched into weeks, and no one came for me, the truth settled into my bones. My mother had traded me for money when I was just 9 years old. The first month at Madam Winter's house, I cried myself to sleep every night. By the second month, the tears had dried up, leaving behind something hard and sharp inside me. By the third month, I discovered my secret weapon. I could read. Not just picture books or primers. I could read anything. Daddy had taught me before he died, spending evenings with me on our porch with borrowed library books. "Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you, Josephine," he'd say. "Fill yourself up with it." At Madam Winter's, books were forbidden to us girls. We were meant to work, not think. But in that house filled with wealthy visitors and their cast-off newspapers, discarded novels, and forgotten correspondence, I found my salvation. I volunteered for dusting duty in the library, smuggling pages torn from books beneath my mattress. I collected words like others might collect pretty stones or hairpins, secretly, preciously. "Girl, what's taking so long with that silverware?" Mrs. Potts, the head housekeeper, barked one afternoon, catching me standing motionless at the dining room sideboard. I jumped, nearly dropping the serving spoon I'd been polishing. I'd been lost in the newspaper left open on the table, reading about the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. Something about segregated schools being unconstitutional. "Nothing, Mrs. Potts. Just making sure it's perfect," I said, quickly lowering my eyes. She narrowed her gaze. "You weren't reading, were you?" "No, ma'am," I lied, heart pounding. She sniffed. "Good. Reading gives servants ideas above their station. Next thing, you'll be thinking you deserve wages." As she walked away, I bit my lip to keep from smiling, because that's exactly what I'd been thinking. That night, I shared what I'd learned with Ruby and the others, whispering by candlelight after lights out. "They say all children deserve equal education now," I told them. "Maybe that means us too." "Fat chance," said Ruby. "Madam has papers on all of us. Our parents signed away our rights." "Papers can be challenged," I whispered, thinking of the legal terminology I'd absorbed from Mr. Winter's law books, especially if they were signed under duress. Ruby looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Where'd you learn words like that?" I smiled. "I've been reading everything I can get my hands on. And I've got a plan." Ruby shook her head. "You're gonna get yourself in trouble, Josephine." Maybe so, but trouble seemed preferable to a lifetime of servitude. Besides, I'd started noticing things, important things, like how Madam kept ledgers tracking her investments, us children. Like how some of the older girls disappeared without explanation, supposedly to advanced positions, but never to be heard from again. Most importantly, I discovered Madam's secret correspondence with wealthy families looking for discreet domestic arrangements for their homes. This wasn't just one house, it was a network, a business built on the backs of children from desperate families. And I was determined to bring it all crashing down. My opportunity came 3 months later when I overheard Madam talking to a visitor, a journalist researching a story on domestic service academies in the South. "Of course, all our girls come from proper contractual arrangements," Madam was saying in the parlor. "Their families are compensated fairly for their education here." From my hiding place behind the curtains where I'd been dusting, I saw my chance. I deliberately knocked over a vase. Madam's head whipped around. "Who's there?" I stepped out, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, Madam. I was just cleaning." Her eyes narrowed, but with the journalist there, she couldn't react as she normally would. Instead, she forced a smile. "This is Josephine, one of our newer students." The journalist, a kind-faced man with wire-rimmed glasses, smiled at me. "Hello, Josephine. How do you like your studies here?" Before Madam could intervene, I looked directly at him, my voice clear and steady. "I haven't had any studies, sir. I was sold here by my mother when I was 9. We all were." The silence that followed was deafening. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I thought the journalist would be my savior, that his story would shut down Madam Winters and free us all. Instead, he never published a word. 2 days after our encounter, Madam called me to her office. "You've made a grave error, Josephine," she said, voice cold as January frost. "Mr. Kavanaugh won't be publishing any stories about us. He understands where his interests lie." On her desk sat a stack of documents, our indenture papers as she called them. Mine was on top. "You should know that your situation is entirely legal," she continued. "Your mother was of sound mind when she accepted payment for your services. 15 years of service, to be precise. Any attempt to challenge this will result in severe consequences, not just for you, but for all the children here." I stood silent, my momentary courage evaporating. "Furthermore," she added, "should you continue this troublesome behavior, I'll have no choice but to transfer you to one of our specialized facilities. Places where rebellious girls learn the true meaning of hardship." That night, Ruby told me what specialized facilities meant. Sweatshops in the next state over, working 16 hours a day making garments. Or worse, places where girls were sent to entertain men. "You need to be smarter, Josephine," Ruby whispered. "Madam has friends in the police, in the courts. You can't beat her head on." She was right. But what Ruby didn't understand was that I'd already set something bigger in motion. During my cleaning duties, I'd been systematically collecting information. Names of other children, copies of transaction records, addresses of Madam's business associates. Most importantly, I'd started writing letters. Dozens of them, smuggled out through a sympathetic delivery boy, who took them to the post office for me in exchange for the few coins I'd saved from tips given by Madam's guests. Letters to newspapers in other cities, to the NAACP, to the governor's office. Letters detailing everything happening within Madam Winters' academy. I knew most would be ignored, but I only needed one person to take me seriously. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Madam, the stakes rose dramatically. Ruby disappeared. When I asked Mrs. Potts where she'd gone, the woman avoided my eyes. "Advanced placement," she muttered. "Now mind your own business." But that night, I found a note scratched into the underside of my bed frame. "Help U.S. Factory on Riverdale. R." Ruby hadn't advanced, she'd been punished, because of me. And she wasn't alone. 2 more girls vanished that week, both who had known about my confrontation with the journalist. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. A dozen children in this house and who knew how many others in Madam's network of academies. Children being worked to the bone, traded like commodities, their future stolen. What had started as my personal mission for freedom had escalated into something much larger. If I failed, I wouldn't be the only one to suffer. I needed allies. I needed evidence. Most of all, I needed a plan that wouldn't get more children hurt in the process. That's when I remembered something I'd read in one of Mr. Winters' law books. The most effective legal challenges come not from confronting illegal actions, but from revealing how seemingly legal actions violate broader constitutional principles. Madam's operation might be technically legal under outdated indenture laws, but it violated the spirit of more recent labor laws, child protection statutes, and potentially even the 13th Amendment's prohibition on involuntary servitude. I just needed to find the right leverage point, and the right ally to help use it. For the next 6 months, I became the model servant. "Yes, madam." "No, madam." "Of course, madam." I cleaned without complaint, served without sullenness, and gradually earned back privileges, including dusting duties in Mr. Winters' study. Jonah Winters was a different creature from his wife. Where she was sharp edges and cold calculation, he was absent-mindedness and quiet regret. A corporate lawyer who spent most of his time at his downtown office, he seemed to barely notice the children working in his home. But as I carefully organized his papers and dusted his bookshelves, I noticed something. He drank. Not ostentatiously, but steadily, starting with bourbon at lunch, and continuing until he fell asleep in his study chair most evenings. In his inebriated state, he talked, sometimes to himself, sometimes to me, as if I were a piece of furniture that could absorb his confessions without judgment. Never meant for it to go this far, he mumbled one evening. Was supposed to be apprenticeships, proper training, not this. I kept my eyes down, dusting the same shelf over and over. What wasn't supposed to be this way, sir? He waved his hand vaguely. This arrangement, Eleanor's business, started after the war. Helping orphans, she said. Now it's something else. Something wrong. I risked looking at him directly. If you know it's wrong, sir, why don't you stop it? He laughed bitterly. Stop Eleanor? Might as well try to stop a hurricane. He took another swig of bourbon. Besides the money, all tied up in her enterprises now. Too many powerful people involved. Would bring everything down. The firm, our reputation. Everything. That night, I lay awake thinking. Mr. Winters had just given me two crucial pieces of information. First, Madam had powerful people involved in her scheme. Second, her husband was a weak link, a man with a conscience, however buried under alcohol and self-justification. The next day, I began my real work. While cleaning his study, I carefully noted the names on his correspondence, the files he left open, the phone calls he made when too drunk to remember I was in the room. I created a mental map of connections. Judges who owed him favors, police chiefs who played golf with him, businessmen whose companies used Madam's placement services for cheap labor. But my most valuable discovery came 3 weeks later, when I found a false bottom in his desk drawer while polishing it, containing photographs. Terrible, damning photographs of conditions in what must have been the specialized facilities Ruby had been sent to. Children, some younger than me, working at sewing machines in crowded rooms, sleeping on bare floors, looking malnourished and exhausted. On the back of each photo was a date and location. Evidence Mr. Winters had been collecting, perhaps in a moment of crisis of conscience, then hiding away rather than acting upon. I couldn't steal the photos, he would notice, but I memorized every detail. Then I made my move. The following Sunday, when I was permitted my weekly hour of recreation in the garden, I approached the groundskeeper's son, Timothy. At 16, he had a bicycle and freedom of movement that I lacked. I need a favor, I said, offering him the small tin of cookies I'd saved from my meager rations. And it's dangerous. Timothy had always been kind to us girls, sneaking us apples from the orchard and warning us when Madam was in a particularly foul mood. He took the cookies but waved away my warning. What do you need, Josephine? I need you to deliver a letter for me. Not to the post office, I said quickly. Directly to someone's hands. A lawyer named Marcus Bell. Timothy frowned. The colored lawyer? The one who works with the NAACP? I nodded. Marcus Bell had been mentioned in a newspaper article I'd read about challenging segregation laws. More importantly, his name had appeared in Mr. Winters' files, not as an ally, but as an adversary in several cases. He's at First Baptist on Sundays, Timothy said thoughtfully. I could say I'm delivering a message from my mother. If you get caught, I began. I won't, he said firmly. Madam Winters isn't the only one who hates what happens in this house. 2 weeks passed with no response. I began to lose hope, wondering if my letter had even reached Mr. Bell, or if he'd dismissed it as a child's fantasy. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the house. From the window where I was washing curtains, I watched a tall, dignified man in a perfectly pressed suit emerge. Even from a distance, I recognized him from newspaper photographs. Marcus Bell. Madam was out for the afternoon, leaving only Mrs. Potts to receive visitors. I raced downstairs, positioning myself to accidentally cross paths with our guest. As he waited in the foyer, I appeared with a tray of tea. Sir, would you care for refreshment while you wait? His eyes met mine, sharp and assessing. No, thank you. Then almost imperceptibly he added, Josephine? I gave the slightest nod. Actually, he said more loudly, I've changed my mind. I would appreciate some tea. As I poured, he spoke in measured tones. My name is Marcus Bell. I'm here to discuss a legal matter with Mr. Winters. I understand he keeps certain documentation in his study regarding labor practices at associated facilities. My heart raced. He'd understood my letter. He was giving me instructions. Yes, sir. Mr. Winters keeps all his important papers in his study. He has a meeting downtown until 4 o'clock. I see. He sipped his tea. And is there someone who might show me to his study? I believe he's expecting me. Before Mrs. Potts could object, I volunteered. I can show the gentleman, Mrs. Potts. I just finished the curtains in the east wing. She frowned but couldn't find a reason to refuse. Be quick about it, then return to your duties. As we climbed the stairs, Mr. Bell spoke softly. Your letter was quite compelling, Josephine. Very articulate for someone your age. My father taught me to read, I said simply, before he died. And your mother truly sold your indenture? The familiar pain twisted in my chest. Yes, sir. For drinking money. He nodded gravely. What you describe is technically legal under certain outdated statutes, but violates numerous child labor laws and potentially constitutes involuntary servitude. However, we need evidence. I know where it is, I whispered as we reached the study door. Once inside, I moved quickly to Mr. Winters' desk, showing Mr. Bell the false bottom in the drawer and the photographs hidden there. I also pointed out the ledgers documenting placement fees, paid by families receiving children as servants, and the correspondence with factory owners discussing labor arrangements. Mr. Bell's expression grew increasingly grim as he examined the evidence. This is worse than I imagined, he muttered. An entire network of child exploitation, hidden behind a veneer of legitimacy. He produced a small camera from his briefcase and began photographing documents. I can't take these originals, it would alert them, but copies will serve our purpose. What happens now? I asked, keeping watch at the door. Now, he said, continuing to work quickly, we build a case. Not just against Madam Winters, but against the entire system she's part of. This will take time, Josephine. Possibly months. Can you continue as you have been? I thought of Ruby, of the other children. Do I have a choice? His eyes softened. Everyone has choices, Josephine. Some are just harder than others. Then I choose to stay and help bring her down, I said firmly. For all of us. As we left the study, Mr. Bell handed me a small object, a tiny notebook with a pencil. Document everything, he whispered. Names, dates, locations. We'll need it all. For the next 4 months, that's exactly what I did. I became Madam Winters' shadow, absorbing every detail of her operation, while appearing completely subservient. I documented which children came and went, which wealthy families they were sent to, which factories received the older ones. I noted which police officers and judges received special gifts from Madam, which politicians attended her dinner parties. All the while, I met with Mr. Bell through Timothy, passing my notes and receiving updates on the legal case he was building. It was slow, meticulous work, the kind that would stand up in court against powerful opponents. By my 10th birthday, we were ready. The day everything changed began like any other. I served breakfast, cleaned the parlor, and helped prepare for one of Madam Winters' infamous luncheons. The kind where wealthy women came to be introduced to potential household help from among the younger children. Today's special guest was the mayor's wife, looking for a companion for her daughter, which everyone knew meant a personal servant disguised as a playmate. I moved silently among the women, refilling teacups and offering finger sandwiches, my ears tuned to their conversation. The problem with regular domestics, Madam was saying, is their lack of proper training. My girls are molded from a young age to understand their place. The mayor's wife nodded appreciatively. And the legal arrangements are secure? Absolutely ironclad, Madam assured her. The parents relinquish all rights. Our contracts have withstood every challenge. I caught the eye of 7-year-old Minnie, who Madam was clearly grooming as the mayor's wife's selection. She looked terrified, her small hands twisting in her starched apron. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived at the house, sold by an uncle after her parents died. Josephine, Madam's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. Bring out the almond cakes. Yes, Madam, I said, heading toward the kitchen. As I pushed through the swinging door, I nearly collided with Mrs. Potts, who was ghost white and trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Police," she whispered. "And lawyers. Coming up the drive. A whole procession of them." My heart leapt. Mr. Bell had moved faster than expected. I had to act quickly. "Mrs. Potts," I said urgently, "get the children. All of them. Bring them to the kitchen." She stared at me. "What are you?" "Please," I begged. "If you've ever felt a moment's guilt about what happens in this house, do this one thing." Something in my voice must have reached her. She nodded once and hurried toward the stairs to the children's quarters. I grabbed the tray of almond cakes and returned to the parlor just as the doorbell rang with an authoritative peal. "Who on earth?" Madam began, rising from her seat. Before the butler could reach the door, it swung open. Marcus Bell stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 police officers and accompanied by a distinguished white man I recognized from newspapers as Federal Judge William Conroy. "Eleanor Winters," Judge Conroy announced. "This is a federal inspection pursuant to allegations of child labor violations and involuntary servitude." The mayor's wife gasped. Madam Winters went rigid, her face a mask of fury. "This is preposterous," she hissed. "I run a respectable academy for disadvantaged girls. Judge Harmon, surely you'll put a stop to this nonsense." She looked toward one of her luncheon guests, a thin-lipped woman who was clearly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid this comes from federal jurisdiction, Eleanor," Judge Harmon said weakly. "There's nothing I can do." Mr. Bell stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room until it found me. He gave an almost imperceptible nod before addressing Madam Winters. "Mrs. Winters, we have documented evidence of systematic child exploitation, illegal labor practices, and fraudulent contracts. We have testimonies from former inmates of your establishment detailing conditions that violate numerous statutes." "This is absurd," Madam sputtered. "These children are here legally. Their parents or guardians signed contracts that have been deemed unconscionable and therefore unenforceable." Mr. Bell finished smoothly. "Furthermore, even if the initial agreements were somehow valid, your subsequent treatment and placement of these children violates the 13th Amendment's prohibition on involuntary servitude." More officers entered, along with social workers carrying clipboards. The mayor's wife and the other luncheon guests were shrinking toward the door. "Josephine," Madam snapped, "show these women out." I set down my tray of cakes. "No, Madam." The silence that followed was absolute. In all my time at the house, no child had ever refused a direct order. "What did you say?" Madam's voice was deadly quiet. I lifted my chin. I said, "No. I won't help you anymore. None of us will." As if on cue, Mrs. Potts appeared in the doorway, surrounded by 24 children of various ages, all in their gray uniforms, all watching with a mixture of fear and hope. "You," Madam whispered, understanding dawning in her cold eyes. "You did this?" "Yes, Madam," I said, stepping toward Mr. Bell and the authorities. "I did." She lunged toward me, fingers curled like claws, but one of the officers stepped between us. "Eleanor Winters," he said formally, "you're under investigation for child exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. I suggest you cooperate fully." "You'll regret this," she hissed at me over the officer's shoulder. "All of you. Do you think anyone wants you? Damaged goods, the lot of you. You'll end up exactly where you started, unwanted and alone." Mr. Bell placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "On the contrary, Mrs. Winters, these children have demonstrated extraordinary resilience and character, something you clearly wouldn't recognize." As the officers began searching the house and social workers interviewed the children, Mr. Bell led me to a quiet corner. "You did well, Josephine," he said. "Extremely well. But this is just the beginning. There will be trials, testimonies. It won't be easy." "What about the others?" I asked. "The ones in the factories and other houses?" He smiled. "We're moving against all of Madam's operations simultaneously. Right now, similar scenes are playing out across 3 states. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt tears well in my eyes. "And Ruby? My friend who was sent away? We've located most of the children transferred to industrial settings," he said carefully. "Recovery operations are underway." "What happens to us now?" It was the question all the children were asking as we were led from the house, some crying, some silent with shock, all of us clutching our few possessions. For now, temporary foster placements, Mr. Bell explained. Eventually, we hope to reunite many of you with your families. Those who were coerced or deceived into these arrangements. I thought of my mother, of the envelope of money she'd accepted. And those of us whose families sold us willingly? His expression softened. We'll find solutions, Josephine. I promise you that. As we filed into buses that would take us to temporary housing, I looked back at Madam Winter's grand house, my prison for nearly a year. She stood on the porch, handcuffed now, watching us leave with pure hatred in her eyes. But it was Mr. Winters who caught my attention. Standing slightly apart from his wife, his face held not anger but profound shame, and perhaps, just perhaps, a hint of relief. 70 years later. The courtroom falls silent as I finish my testimony. At 80 years old, I've returned to Louisiana for the final chapter of a story that began when I was 9. Mrs. Josephine Samuels, the federal prosecutor says, your testimony has been invaluable to this historical case review. Can you tell the court how these events shaped your subsequent life? I look out at the packed gallery, journalists, law students, social workers, and in the front row, my daughter, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all watching with pride. After leaving Madam Winter's house, I begin. I was placed with a foster family, the Samuels, who eventually adopted me. With their support and Mr. Bell's mentorship, I finished school and went on to college, eventually earning a law degree myself. Murmurs of appreciation ripple through the courtroom. I've spent my career prosecuting cases of human trafficking and child exploitation. I continue. And establishing foundations to support survivors. The system that allowed children to be bought and sold existed in the shadows of legality for decades after my own experience. Dismantling it has been my life's work. And your mother? The prosecutor asks gently. Did you ever reconnect with her? The letter beneath my pillow at the nursing home flashes in my mind. The confession I'd finally read just weeks ago, prompting me to contact the federal task force examining historical cases of child exploitation. No, I say quietly. I never saw her again. She died when I was in college. What I don't say is that her letter revealed the truth I'd never known. That she hadn't sold me for drinking money after all. She'd sold me because she was dying of cancer, with no health insurance and no way to pay for treatment. The money from Madam Winters had gone to a desperate, futile attempt to extend her life, to be there for me somehow. I did what I thought was best, her letter had said. They promised you'd be educated, cared for. By the time I learned the truth, I was too far gone to fight for you. I've carried that shame to my deathbed. The prosecutor nods respectfully. One final question, Mrs. Samuels. This court's historical review has identified over 3,000 children who passed through Madam Winter's network between 1945 and 1965. Many of them have been located and will receive restitution from the estates of those involved. But more importantly, your testimony has helped change how we understand and prosecute modern trafficking cases. How does that make you feel? I look at the eagle above the judge's bench, thinking of that frightened 9-year-old girl who'd found her strength in words and knowledge. Vindicated. I say simply, not just for myself, but for Ruby, for Minnie, for all the children who didn't have voices. The system that allowed us to be traded like commodities has finally been held accountable. After the hearing, surrounded by my family on the courthouse steps, a young reporter approaches me. Mrs. Samuels, you've achieved so much. A successful legal career, a loving family, national recognition for your advocacy work. Yet you began with such trauma. What's your secret? I smile, thinking of my father's words on our porch long ago. Knowledge is power, I tell her. But love is healing. I was fortunate enough to find both after losing everything. My granddaughter squeezes my hand as we walk to the waiting car. Grandma, she says, you never told us the whole story before. Some stories take a lifetime to be ready to tell, I reply. Later that evening, in my hotel room, I take out my mother's letter again. After 70 years of believing one truth, I'm still adjusting to another. My mother didn't choose alcohol over me. She chose a desperate chance at survival, however misguided. Does it change what happened? No. Does it change who I became? Also no. But as I prepare to sleep, I find myself doing something I haven't done since I was 9 years old, praying for my mother's soul. I forgive you. I whisper to the faded paper. I made something of myself like you asked. I wish you could have seen it. In the morning, I'll return to the courthouse for the final day of testimonies. The case against Madam Winter's network isn't just about historical justice. It set legal precedent for how trafficking cases are prosecuted today. My phone rings, my daughter calling to make sure I'm resting after the emotional day. I'm fine, Eliza, I assure her. Just thinking about everything. Mom, she says hesitantly, that twist about Grandma Helen, about the cancer. Are you okay with that truth? I sigh, looking at the letter on the nightstand. Truth is complicated, baby. For 70 years, I built my life around one story, that she abandoned me for selfish reasons. Finding out she was desperate, dying. My voice catches. It doesn't erase the trauma, but it gives me peace I never expected to find. The second twist too, Eliza says softly, about Mrs. Potts helping you in the end. After all that time enforcing Madam's rules. I smile at the memory. People can surprise you. Sometimes the most unlikely allies appear when you need them most. After we hang up, I open the bedside drawer and take out the other document I've carried with me to Louisiana. A worn photograph of Ruby, taken at my law school graduation. We'd found each other 15 years after the raid on Madam Winter's house. She'd survived the factory, eventually becoming a union organizer fighting for workers' rights. We made it, Ruby. I whisper to her image. We really made it. As I drift toward sleep, I think about tomorrow's final statement to the court. My chance to address not just the historical record, but future generations. My legacy won't be that I was a child sold by her mother. It will be that I was a woman who turned that pain into purpose, who spent 80 years proving that your beginning doesn't have to define your end. That's the story worth telling, not just how I was traded, but how I reclaimed my true value, and helped thousands of others do the same. In my dreams that night, I'm 9 again, standing on Madam Winter's porch. But this time, instead of being led inside, I turn and walk away, my head held high, toward a future bright with possibility. And somehow, walking beside me is my mother. Not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the complicated, flawed human she really was. Sometimes freedom comes not just from escaping your prison, but from understanding the jailers, even when one of them was someone you loved.